Okay. What led you to want to do ministry?
It's a great question. When I was about 11 years old, I got saved at this little church in Rantoul, Illinois. And there was that, which was fantastic, obviously. And I got baptized later that year. And as part of that, there was just something else. Not that Jesus wasn't enough. I mean, I was saved and I started as much as an 11-year-old can understand trying to grow and be a disciple, right? But there was just something else that I felt like God had in store for me. I couldn't define what that was or anything. I do remember thinking that our preacher had the greatest job in the world, that he got to stand up in front of everybody on a Sunday and tell people about Jesus and teach us from the Bible. I thought, man, what a great thing that he does. And that, as an 11-year-old, again, I thought that's what preachers do. Once a week, they get up and tell people about Jesus. I didn't know there was a job, right? So when I was in high school, like ninth grade, I went to a camp, and they talked about being called to vocational ministry, and they kind of explained that a little bit more, and I was like, okay, vocational meaning if God has called me to this, then I can have this as a job. So during that week, the Lord just kept talking to me and tugging on my heart, and I just felt like it sort of was an affirmation of what I had experienced when I was about 11 years old, and the time between that time, kind of wrestling with and trying to figure out what that meant. And I felt, based on what was explained to me, I was like, I think I've been called to full-time ministry. So I went forward and I filled out this little thing, and people from Lifeways sent me a little note and kind of helped me, these are the next steps kind of thing. And I talked to some pastor friends of mine as I was growing up that would help me try to decide that. So it was between the summer between 9th and 10th grade that I actually surrendered to be in the ministry. Again, I didn't fully know exactly what that meant until I went to college, and in conversation with pastors and kind of through observation saw, okay, this is what it means to be in ministry. Not necessarily making a distinction necessarily between every person who follows Jesus is to be a minister for the gospel. We're all to be witnesses, right? But there's some that God has called out to equip everybody else to do what they're all supposed to do as followers, as disciples of Jesus. So it was kind of a long process for me to come to that conclusion, and been pursuing that, since that time. So
then what led you to do youth ministry and be the youth guy of the Baptist convention?
Okay. In the process of all of that and trying to determine what it meant to be a full-time minister or, serving in vocational ministry. We didn't use that terminology necessarily back in those days, but to serve full-time in ministry is how we refer to it. I was kind of wrestling with, what does that mean? Do I need to be a preacher? Because I have some musical ability and I could lead worship, or at least in those days, stand in front of people and help them lead, sing hymns, is what we did back in those days. So I could do some of that stuff, and I was kind of experiencing that on one level or another, helping out in the church as a college student, mostly. And while I was in college, I had an opportunity to actually, right before I went to college, I had an opportunity to go kind of as a chaperone, sort of. It was not exactly I didn't meet the age requirement to be a chaperone at this camp that I went to, but the youth pastor sort of grandfathered me in to be one of the adult chaperones. I had been out of high school for a year, so I kind of had some separation with the high school students that I was helping chaperone. And it was kind of during that week that I was like, student ministry, youth ministry, as we called it in the day, this is pretty cool. You get to hang out with kids and have a good time, and you can make them laugh a little bit, and you teach them the Bible a little bit. And, of course, that was just scratching the surface of what it meant to be in student ministry. So since that time, during that time of college and growth in that and trying to figure all of that out, I discovered that there's a whole lot more to it. And I was getting in the beginning of youth ministry, or when I started my time in youth ministry, that was kind of the right towards a little past the beginning of when youth ministry sort of became a real ministry within a church staff, where it was not looked down on as this kind of secondary thing, but it started growing some prominence. Guys were starting to be called youth pastor. There was the Christian schools, Baptist schools were offering degrees in youth ministry. Seminaries were offering, you could get a Master of Divinity with an emphasis in youth ministry. So there was lots and lots of training going on, and I didn't do that necessarily through college and seminary, but because mine was kind of more of a general kind of a theology degree. I didn't have any kind of a specific in youth ministry, but during that time I was reading a lot and studying a lot and going to conferences and things and learning to try to be the best youth pastor that I could be. So when I graduated from Eastern, I went to First Baptist Silver City, and my first full-time position as on staff at a church was the minister of youth and music at First Baptist in Silver City. And then from there, I went to First Baptist Carlsbad and was started my career, quote unquote career, as a youth minister only, exclusively. And so from that time, from about 1990 until 2007, I served on different church staffs as the youth pastor. And then the Baptist Convention of New Mexico got a new executive director, and he was going to do some restructuring as far as the staff of the convention staff was concerned. And I had kind of heard through the grapevine that he was going to look for some age grade specialists. So he was going to hire a collegiate person to oversee all the collegiate ministries, not oversee, but to focus on, because we don't oversee, Baptist Convention doesn't oversee anything. We help churches in the state with their youth ministry, kind of like a consultant. So anyway, so they were going to hire a collegiate guy, a children's person, and a youth guy. And I told him, I said, I would be interested in finding out more about that job, what that would mean to work on a state level in youth ministry. So he gave me a call, we talked about it, and after some praying and deliberating and talking to my wife and my kids and all that, because it would mean a move to Albuquerque from Las Cruces, because at the time I was the youth pastor here at Calvary Baptist. And after working all that out and praying through, we just really felt like that was kind of the next step. After 23 years of serving in the local church, the next step for me to serve vocationally or kind of a transition in my job was to work on the state level. So that's how I ended up as the state youth guy, which was the easiest way to remember what I did, in charge of camps and student conferences and training for youth workers and being a resource and a consultant for churches to help them with their student ministry. And I did that for 16 years, helped them out in that way. So that's kind of the journey that brought me to work on the state level for the Baptist Convention.
I'm actually going to add a question.
Okay.
What was super memorable about being able to run all of the youth stuff on a state level and being able to run the camps? Like, what makes that memorable for you?
Oh, wow. Gosh, there's so many things. One was, the disadvantage was I no longer had my own group that I was shepherding. As a local church youth pastor, I had one group of students that I was shepherding, that we, as kids got saved and became members of the church and started attending our Sunday school and our Wednesday night stuff and all the stuff we had going on at the church. I was able to kind of have that kind of a group that I was discipling, right? So on the state level, it just grew, and it kind of expanded the group of people that I was discipling. It was less formal in the sense that I didn't necessarily meet with the same students every week, but I did have relationships with the youth pastors around the state, and I was more formally kind of pouring into those guys to help them to be better youth pastors, to come alongside them, to kind of be their pastor, that if they had questions or if they had frustrations or just needed to vent for a little while, they knew that they could call me. And so that kind of was a large umbrella of the kind of stuff that I did. But some of the most memorable things, it was hard work, seasonally hard work, like getting ready for camp from about the end of February, first part of March through the end of June, I was incredibly busy. There was little bits of busyness in prepping for camp year round, but that's when all of it really kind of came to a head. But it all paid off when one kid at camp would get saved, or a student would come up after camp and say, I didn't want to be here this week. My mom made me come to this camp. I didn't want to be here at all. But I'm so glad that I came because God taught me this and this and this. And so it was just little things like that. I can't necessarily remember the specifics, but the little things like what I call flipping the switch. When a student shares with me something that makes a lot of sense to them, and it's like, boom, okay, now I get it. And to be able to kind of, nudge them in the right direction and say, okay, great. I'm glad that you experienced that this week at camp, but there's more to it. You've got to go home and you've got to continue that journey. So you and your youth pastor need to have a conversation, or the lead youth worker if the church didn't have a youth pastor, something like that. So probably the most memorable thing to zero in on that part of your question is just being able to see that the efforts that I put into the physical efforts after God calling me to do all that, putting it into, was worth every bit of aggravation because of what God did in somebody's life as a result of working and serving in what He had called me to do. And that I don't want that to sound like I'm taking credit for that, because that's not how I feel about it at all. It's an incredibly humbling position to be in. And in some degree, kind of like, Lord, why do I get to do this? Why are you allowing me to have this? I want to serve you faithfully. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to put stuff in place. I'm going to kind of have some infrastructure that will help students and adults that come with the students to be able to focus on you really, really intently during that week of camp.
Cool. So for the last question, what are you doing right now?
Okay, right now I am the associate pastor here at Calvary Baptist. I've been here about, 19 months or something like that. The end of September will be 2 years. So whatever the math is there. I am basically overseeing the discipleship and the education of the church, which means my area of responsibility is to help set up classes that do what we would call indirect discipleship, where I offer classes that will help people to learn to move along in their walk, their spiritual progression with the Lord. I'm not necessarily sitting down with all of those people and discipling them. I'm indirectly discipling them by putting these things in place to allow them to attend classes and learn some things like that, and even set up some relationships where they can have conversations and being discipling relationships. And then, of course, for Sunday school, encouraging people to be a part of Sunday morning Bible study in the small groups in that way, so that iron sharpens iron kind of a thing, and kind of encourage that. I'm also, I work side by side with our lead pastor, Pastor Caleb, and help him to just pastor, to shepherd the church. We're getting big enough now. I mean, we're not huge by any stretch of the imagination, but we're big enough now where it's hard for one person to be able to focus on that kind of stuff. And so I've been here, like I said, for that amount of time so far to help him, kind of come alongside him and help him with that kind of stuff. And it's a little different for me. It's been a little bit of a learning curve because, I've been working around students my whole life. And so to be here, I've had to learn how to hang out with adults, which are that's a little weird. Adults are weird. Students are a whole lot more fun. I'm just kidding. I love adults too. But it has been a little bit of an adjustment for me to not be directly involved with the student ministry. Now, the way we're structured here at Calvary, I kind of help with or oversee the children's ministry and the youth ministry. So I'm a little bit involved in that way, just simply because of the life experience that I've had for all those years, to be able to pour into Veronica and into Jared to help them and let them do it their own way and create their, let them follow the Lord's leadership on how to do student or children's ministry and let them fail even. And then after they fail, we say, what did we learn? And when something happens with no failure, which happens a lot because both of those folks are super sharp, then we just celebrate that and say, hey, that was a great idea that you did by dividing the students up that way, or doing this with children's ministry. Or so I'm kind of like their biggest cheerleader, I guess, is what. Coach, cheerleader and coach. That's what I am.
Cool.
Okay?
Got it.
Wow.